He tried to break him, but he made the impossible happen. Marcus, a talented home cook working as a dishwasher in a high-end restaurant, always kept to himself. Chef Lorenz, arrogant and famous for his temper, noticed Marcus's skill during a late-night cleaning shift. "Let's see if you can actually cook," Lorenzo sneered in front of the staff, pushing Marcus into the busy kitchen during peak hours. The entire kitchen laughed, expecting him to fail. Marcus's hands trembled, but his eyes burned with quiet determination. Marcus hesitated as he stood in the gleaming kitchen, the polished countertops reflecting the bright overhead lights, the clatter of utensils, and the rhythmic chopping of vegetables creating a chaotic symphony that could intimidate even the most seasoned chefs. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the staff's skeptical gazes upon him. The sous chefs, each with years of culinary experience etched into their hands and faces, exchanged knowing smirks, confident that disaster was imminent. The waitstaff lingered at the edge of the kitchen, whispering bets to each other about how long it would take for Marcus to ruin the first dish, predicting splattered sauces, burnt pans, or a catastrophic collapse of flavor. Marcus's hands trembled slightly as he reached for the cutting board, but beneath the nervousness, a spark of determination ignited. He reminded himself that he had studied every recipe, every technique, every subtle nuance of flavor that Chef Lorenz demanded in his prestigious establishment. As he began chopping, each precise motion revealed a surprising steadiness, a rhythm that seemed almost instinctive. The vegetables fell into perfect uniformity, their vibrant colors contrasting beautifully against the stark white board, and Marcus felt a quiet satisfaction at the first sign of control. He moved quickly but deliberately, measuring spices with a careful hand, blending ingredients in ways that seemed to defy the conventional approaches the kitchen staff were used to seeing. A subtle aroma began to fill the air, a delicate yet complex fragrance that hinted at creativity and an unexpected harmony. Chef Lorenzo, tall and imposing with a meticulously groomed mustache and eyes that seemed to pierce straight through anyone who dared to misstep, leaned in slightly, frowning as if the very act of Marcus's confidence irritated him. "Beginner's luck," he muttered under his breath, but his voice carried a tinge of disbelief that he tried desperately to hide behind a veil of scorn. Despite his efforts, the whispered admiration of the sous chefs began to ripple through the kitchen like a rising tide. Eyes widened, murmurs spread, and a cautious respect began to replace the initial amusement. Marcus, unaware of the small revolution happening behind him, focused entirely on the task at hand, letting his instincts guide him as if the ingredients themselves whispered the next steps into his mind. He plated the dish with a finesse that belied his inexperience, arranging each element with the precision of an artist, every color, every texture, every sauce placement designed to please the eye as much as the palate. The simplicity of the presentation contrasted with the boldness of the flavors, creating a sense of balance that was immediately noticeable. He took a step back, wiped his hands on his apron, and held his breath, waiting for the inevitable criticism. Chef Lorenzo approached, his polished shoes clicking against the tiled floor, his shadow falling over the plate like a storm cloud, and the kitchen seemed to hold its collective breath. He lifted a fork with his signature scrutiny, tasted carefully, and then paused, a subtle frown forming as he considered the unexpected complexity of the flavors. A silence fell, thick and almost unbearable, before Lorenzo spoke. "Well, it's acceptable," he said finally, though his tone betrayed a flicker of surprise he could not entirely suppress. The sous chefs exchanged glances, incredulous at the understatement. Marcus felt a rush of relief, a quiet triumph that was almost euphoric, though he kept his composure, nodding politely and not allowing himself to smile too widely. The whispers of admiration grew louder, a gentle crescendo of approval, as other chefs began to murmur about the ingenuity of his seasoning, the creativity of his combination, and the surprising harmony of textures that should not have worked together but somehow did. Even the waitstaff, often unnoticed in these elite kitchens, began sharing their quiet astonishment, exchanging furtive smiles and comments about how the dish seemed to transcend the normal expectations of this restaurant. Marcus noticed the subtle shift in the atmosphere. The air, once thick with anticipation of failure, now carried a hint of curiosity and respect. Encouraged, he moved on to the next plate, determined to maintain the delicate balance he had created. His hands moved with increased confidence, the nervous tremor fading, replaced by a rhythm born of focus and passion. Every stir, every chop, every drizzle of sauce became a note in a symphony of culinary artistry that began to capture the attention of everyone around him. Chef Lorenzo, though outwardly composed, could not hide the flicker of doubt that crossed his face as he observed Marcus's precise technique and inventive approach. He had trained countless apprentices, but something about Marcus was different. There was an instinctive understanding of flavor, a creativity that could not simply be taught or acquired through rote repetition. His scornful mask remained in place, but inside, a rare sense of unease began to take root. The other chefs, sensing the shift in the maestro's demeanor, watched Marcus with a mixture of curiosity and awe, some leaning slightly closer to catch the subtleties of his work, hoping to learn from his unconventional approach. Marcus felt the weight of their scrutiny, but transformed it into fuel, channeling the pressure into careful precision and bold choices. He experimented with textures, balanced heat and acidity, and layered flavors in a way that was both inventive and harmonious, surprising himself with each new combination that came together flawlessly. By the time he finished, the final plate was a masterpiece in its own right, a dish that was elegant in its simplicity, complex in its flavor profile, and visually stunning. The colors were vivid but balanced, the arrangement meticulous, and the aromas tantalizing. Marcus placed it gently on the pass, his heart pounding, waiting for the inevitable verdict. Chef Lorenzo leaned over, inspecting every detail with the meticulous eye of a master. He lifted a fork, tasted, and for a brief moment, his expression was unreadable. Then he nodded almost imperceptibly, a gesture that sent subtle waves of astonishment through the kitchen. "Interesting," he murmured, his voice low and begrudgingly approving. The sous chefs allowed themselves a moment of muted celebration, exchanging glances filled with quiet disbelief. The waitstaff, previously eager to witness chaos, now whispered among themselves about the unexpected skill displayed by this unlikely newcomer. Marcus, feeling a mixture of pride and relief, allowed himself the faintest of smiles, understanding that this first attempt had not only proven his ability, but had begun to shift the perception of those around him. He realized that cooking was not merely about following recipes. It was about intuition, courage, and the willingness to trust oneself even when the odds seemed stacked against you. As he wiped his hands and prepared for the next challenge, Marcus felt a growing confidence, a sense of belonging that had been missing in his life until now. The whispers of admiration continued to circulate through the kitchen, a subtle hum of recognition that suggested something profound had occurred. A new presence, one that combined creativity, skill, and audacity, had emerged. Marcus had taken his first step, not merely into the kitchen, but into a world where talent could not be ignored, where respect was earned through action, and where even the most skeptical could not deny the emergence of something extraordinary. Word spread like wildfire through the kitchen, the news carried from the dishwashing station to the pastry corner, whispered over steaming pots and sizzling pans. A dishwasher, a man no one had taken seriously, had not only survived the chaos of Chef Lorenzo's exacting kitchen, but had excelled, creating a dish that even the seasoned chefs could not fault. The realization struck like a lightning bolt, electrifying the staff with a mixture of awe and disbelief, while simultaneously igniting a storm within Lorenzo himself. Pride, that rigid and unyielding pillar he had built around his reputation, fractured under the weight of an unanticipated threat. He felt the sting of humiliation, a sensation he rarely allowed himself to experience, and it festered into a bitter determination. He could not tolerate being overshadowed by someone so inexperienced, someone so unexpected. The idea that his authority could be questioned in the sacred arena of his kitchen was intolerable, and so he resolved to crush Marcus, to remind the entire brigade that skill, status, and years of training could never be replaced by luck or audacity. Lorenzo's eyes, sharp and calculating, began to follow Marcus's every movement, watching the slightest tremor in his hands, the faintest hesitation in his pace, as though expecting any moment of weakness to betray him. He began assigning tasks designed to be impossible, recipes with multiple complex techniques layered simultaneously, dishes that required an orchestration of timing so precise it bordered on the miraculous, and ingredients that needed exact temperature control and finesse he assumed Marcus could not manage. The sous chefs watched these assignments unfold with barely concealed smirks, expecting the dishwasher to falter, to spill sauces, overcook proteins, or collapse under the pressure. The waitstaff, who had previously regarded Marcus with curiosity, now leaned in with heightened anticipation, eager for the drama they believed was inevitable. Marcus, however, did not flinch. The initial tremor of fear had been replaced by a quiet focus, a calm determination to rise above expectations and defy the predictions of both the skeptical and the arrogant. He moved through the kitchen like a force of controlled energy, scanning ingredients, recalling techniques he had only observed in online videos, home experiments, and fragments of culinary books he had studied in secret. Where others saw scraps of vegetables or remnants of sauces, Marcus saw opportunity, potential, and innovation. He began improvising, blending flavors in daring combinations, employing cooking techniques he had practiced in isolation, searing with exact timing, reducing sauces to perfection, folding delicate mixtures with the precision of a trained hand. Every dish he crafted, though born from improvisation rather than repetition, emerged with a coherence that astonished the watching staff. The aroma of his creations began to permeate the kitchen, subtle yet alluring, hinting at layers of complexity hidden within deceptively simple presentations. Even the sous chefs began to exchange glances of incredulity, whispering to each other that they had never seen anyone, let alone a dishwasher, display such instinctive mastery. Lorenzo's scorn intensified, but beneath it, an involuntary admiration gnawed at him, a feeling he refused to acknowledge aloud. Every time he tasted one of Marcus's creations, he was forced to swallow his disbelief and praise it internally, while externally maintaining the mask of severity. He began to escalate the difficulty, stacking multiple challenges in a single service, giving Marcus combinations of protein, starch, and sauce that required exact sequencing to avoid catastrophe. Others in the kitchen anticipated failure at each step. The steak could be overcooked, the sauce could split, the garnish could wilt. Yet Marcus navigated every obstacle with ingenuity, often turning limitations into opportunities. When given minimal ingredients, he devised substitutes that enhanced rather than compromised the dish. When recipes demanded precision tools or techniques unavailable to him, he improvised using what was on hand, transforming improvisation into art. As he plated dish after dish, the staff could no longer contain their admiration. Quiet cheers, subtle nods, and furtive glances of encouragement spread through the kitchen. The dishwasher, who was supposed to fail, had become the center of a silent movement, an unlikely hero quietly redefining what excellence looked like. Every step Marcus took was deliberate, every gesture infused with care and confidence. The once skeptical sous chefs now leaned in closer, observing his every choice, secretly inspired by his creativity and adaptability. Waiters who had once rolled their eyes at his presence now whispered encouragements, predicting that patrons would be astonished when the dishes reached the tables. Even the seasoned-line cooks, men and women who had spent decades under Lorenzo's exacting standards, found themselves reconsidering their own assumptions about skill, talent, and hierarchy. Lorenzo, increasingly desperate, intensified his scrutiny, muttering sharp instructions under his breath, attempting subtle psychological traps to destabilize Marcus, yet nothing seemed to break him. Each time Marcus completed a difficult plate flawlessly, Lorenzo's anger flared, but with it came a grudging recognition that this young man possessed a rare combination of intuition, courage, and creativity that was not easily taught or suppressed. The tension between them became palpable, a charged atmosphere that electrified the kitchen with both challenge and opportunity. Staff members began to subtly root for Marcus, exchanging furtive smiles and whispered comments of encouragement, thrilled by the prospect of witnessing the dishwasher continue to defy the impossible. As the evening service progressed, Marcus's confidence grew, yet it remained tempered with humility and focus. He worked methodically, blending, tasting, adjusting, and plating, never once allowing the pressure to cloud his judgment. Each dish became more refined, more daring, and more impressive, drawing silent admiration from the very people who had anticipated his failure. He experimented with textures and temperatures, balancing sweet, salty, sour, and bitter with a sensitivity that seemed instinctive. By the time the final orders were sent out, the kitchen was transformed. Whispers of doubt had been replaced by murmurs of respect, a subtle acknowledgement that something extraordinary had emerged from the most unlikely of places. The night ended with a sense of quiet revolution. Marcus had not only survived the impossible tasks set by Lorenzo, he had excelled, turning challenges into opportunities for creativity and innovation. The staff, who had once doubted him, now shared a secret admiration, exchanging glances filled with wonder and pride. Lorenzo, for all his pride and arrogance, felt a twinge of unease. He had been forced to confront a reality he had long avoided, that true talent could emerge from anywhere, and that sometimes the unlikeliest candidates possessed the ability to surpass even the most seasoned professionals. Marcus, exhausted yet exhilarated, cleaned his station with a quiet sense of accomplishment. He had not only proven himself capable, but had begun to shift the very dynamics of the kitchen, planting the seeds of change, admiration, and respect that would continue to grow in the days to come. The morning had begun like any other in Chef Lorenzo's kitchen, the air thick with the mingling scents of sautéing garlic, roasting meats, and fresh herbs, punctuated by the sharp clatter of knives against cutting boards. But by mid-afternoon, a ripple of unease spread through the staff. A high-profile food critic, someone whose reviews could elevate a restaurant to international fame or dismantle its reputation overnight, had arrived unexpectedly. The news traveled quickly from the front desk to the kitchen, whispered in hurried tones that carried equal parts excitement and dread. Lorenzo's face, usually composed and impervious, betrayed a flicker of panic, his jaw tightening as he realized the stakes. Every plate leaving the kitchen would now be scrutinized by a man whose palate was legendary, a critic whose words could make or break careers. And Lorenzo knew, with a sinking certainty, that if Marcus's talent were to shine under this intense spotlight, it could eclipse his own meticulously cultivated reputation, turning the spotlight onto someone he had long considered inferior. His pride, which had been bruised by Marcus's previous successes, now flared into a desperate need to regain control. He summoned Marcus with a sharp call, the echo of his voice cutting through the din of the kitchen like a whip. Marcus approached cautiously, aware of the tension, his pulse quickening but his composure intact, and Lorenzo, his eyes narrowing, barked an order that was meant as a trap. "You will prepare our signature dish for the critic. Do not fail. I am trusting you with the restaurant's reputation, but know this, if this fails, the consequences will be severe." The sous chefs exchanged knowing glances, fully expecting disaster, confident that the combination of pressure, complexity, and Marcus's inexperience would result in a catastrophic collapse. Even the waitstaff, who had quietly begun rooting for him, held their breath, anxious yet secretly hopeful for the impossible. Marcus nodded, absorbing the weight of Lorenzo's command without a hint of fear. The signature dish was revered, a complex symphony of flavors, textures, and techniques that had been perfected over years of experimentation, one that required exact timing, flawless execution, and an almost ritualistic precision. Most seasoned chefs in the brigade would have approached it with trepidation, yet Marcus, drawing on everything he had learned from observation, practice, and instinct, began assembling the ingredients with a focused intensity. He washed, chopped, and measured with careful precision, his hands moving with a confidence that belied the enormity of the task. He improvised subtle enhancements, balancing acidity, sweetness, and seasoning in ways that no one had expected, recalling nuances from cooking shows he had studied, techniques he had practiced in his tiny home kitchen, and the fleeting insights gleaned from watching Lorenzo himself over countless hours. The kitchen watched in suspended silence, each chef and waiter sensing that something extraordinary was unfolding. As Marcus worked, Lorenzo hovered over him, scrutinizing every movement, offering sharp directives that were meant to intimidate, but Marcus absorbed the instructions calmly, adapting on the fly. He executed techniques with a deft touch, searing proteins to perfection, emulsifying sauces into creamy, glossy textures, and assembling the final plate with the precision of an artist arranging a painting. The ingredients, from the freshest herbs to the delicate garnishes, seemed to respond to his touch, transforming under his hands into a composition that was both visually stunning and conceptually inventive. The kitchen smelled of triumph even before the dish was finished, the air charged with anticipation and disbelief. The sous chefs could not conceal their astonishment, exchanging furtive glances and muttered praises, while the waitstaff, who had once doubted Marcus, now whispered encouragements, their excitement barely contained. Finally, Marcus presented the dish, placing it carefully on the pass with a reverence that mirrored the gravity of the moment. Plate was a masterpiece, vibrant colors arranged in perfect harmony, textures that promised contrast and balance, and an aroma that was simultaneously familiar and surprising, teasing the palate before the first bite. Lorenzo, standing rigidly, felt a strange mix of pride and fear, an internal conflict he had never experienced so intensely. He watched as a server carried the plate to the critic, a man whose presence seemed to command the room, whose reputation was both revered and feared. The critic lifted his fork, tasting the dish with measured deliberation, his face an inscrutable mask, yet the silence that followed was heavy with tension, as though the world had paused to witness the verdict. Then slowly, the critic's eyes widened, and a smile subtle but unmistakable spread across his face. He spoke, his voice carrying effortlessly across the dining area, capturing the attention of staff, diners, and chefs alike. This is extraordinary, a culinary revelation. The balance of flavors, the precision of execution, the creativity, it is unlike anything I have tasted in years. Who is responsible for this? The words hung in the air like a lightning strike, shocking everyone in the kitchen, reverberating through the staff, and reaching Lorenzo in a way that cut deeper than any criticism could. The arrogance, the pride, the facade of invincibility he had worn for so long cracked, if only for a moment, as he stared at Marcus with a mixture of disbelief, awe, and a begrudging respect that he could not fully articulate. The whispers of admiration, previously restrained, erupted into quiet celebration among the kitchen staff, the sous chefs exchanging glances of astonishment, acknowledging that the dishwasher they had once mocked had now achieved what few seasoned professionals could. Waitstaff, emboldened by the critics' praise, allowed themselves smiles and soft exclamations, marveling at the transformation that had occurred before their eyes. Marcus, standing quietly at his station, felt a wave of relief and exhilaration, yet remained composed, understanding that this moment, while significant, was only the beginning of a journey defined by creativity, resilience, and determination. He had not only survived the impossible challenge set by Lorenzo, but had surpassed expectations, forcing even the most skeptical to acknowledge his talent. The atmosphere in the kitchen shifted, a subtle but undeniable realignment of respect and hierarchy. Marcus was no longer merely the dishwasher, no longer merely an underdog. He had become a force to be reckoned with, a presence whose skill demanded recognition. Lorenzo, meanwhile, retreated briefly to collect himself, grappling with emotions he had long suppressed: fear, admiration, and the unsettling realization that he could be overshadowed, not through incompetence, but through talent, ingenuity, and courage. The high-profile visit, which he had expected to reinforce his authority, had instead become a turning point, illuminating Marcus's potential and challenging the very foundation of Lorenzo's pride. He could no longer dismiss Marcus with derision or arrogance. The world had seen what he had refused to acknowledge for himself. As the critic wrote his glowing review, photographing the dish and noting its intricacies, the restaurant buzzed with a renewed energy, a collective recognition that a new chapter had begun, one in which talent, creativity, and courage could redefine expectations. Marcus returned to his work, calm yet confident, understanding that the challenge had changed more than the critic's opinion. It had changed the dynamics of the kitchen, had cracked the armor of arrogance, and had planted the seeds of respect, admiration, and possibility that would continue to grow with every dish he created. The critic requested Marcus personally cook a private tasting menu. Word of his talents spread like wildfire, and Lorenzo had no choice but to acknowledge him publicly. Marcus was offered a sous chef position and respect from the entire staff. For the first time, Lorenzo experienced humility and a grudging admiration for Marcus's skill and courage. Marcus eventually became the head chef of his own renowned restaurant, famed for creativity and heart. Lorenzo, having learned the price of arrogance, became a mentor to young chefs, valuing skill over ego. The dishwasher, who was once humiliated, had not only survived the challenge, but changed an entire kitchen's culture, turning humiliation into triumph.